Hi everyone, and welcome to Criminal Justice Natters with me, Dr. Ed Johnston. I'm a senior lecturer in law at the University of the West of England, and I've devised this vlog to highlight issues within the criminal justice system and just raise awareness regarding those issues. I'm going to be having natters with academics, practicing lawyers, and people who are accused of crimes, both from England and Wales and from international jurisdictions as well. This evening, we're joined by Liam Allan, who 3 years ago was a young man who was accused and eventually charged with numerous counts of rape and sexual assault. Liam spent 2 years on bail before his case dramatically collapsed on the third day of his trial, owing to some serious disclosure failings. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Hi, Liam. Okay, thanks for joining us tonight on Criminal Justice Natters.
Having me.
Some of our viewers will absolutely know who you are, but for the sake of some of them who don't know who you are, I wondered if you could give a brief introduction and sort of brief retelling of your journey through the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I think most people know me as the boy that was falsely accused of multiple rape and sexual assault. In the end, it actually turned out that the police were withholding the evidence that proved I was innocent. So we went through everything for about 2 years, and then in the third day of my trial, it came to light that there were messages, specific text messages, and so on and so forth, media messages, basically, that all didn't just, I mean, it completely destroyed the prosecution case. Everything that was being said didn't make sense in terms of the accusation anyway, but the messages just essentially proved that that was the case. Um, but yeah, I was arrested January 31st, 2016. Never forget that day, that's good. Um, yeah, I was literally, I'd just come home from football. It was a fairly normal day. I was in my dressing gown, which was awkward at the time. Got a knock on the door. Turned out to be the police. My mum was initially there. They tried to come in. Mum said no. There was just a bit of a tense moment straight away. You could tell that things were a bit off. And yeah, I got dressed. They took me down to the police station. Was sat in a holding cell for about 6.5 hours, something along those lines. And then had my interview, and that was it. I left accused of rape and sexual assault. That was yeah, after 6 months, 4 to 6 months of no contact.
Mm-hmm.
So it was completely out of the blue. And then yeah, my police officer in charge kept telling me throughout that he doesn't think I should be charged and doesn't think it's going to go anywhere. And then I got a phone call after about a year and a month of constantly asking what was going on. And the police officer in charge, said, "I'm really, really sorry that they've decided to pursue it." Completely shattered my world, to be honest. At the time, I was studying criminology, so the irony wasn't lost. Doing exams about false accusations and then kind of actually, well, not kind of actually living one. Um, and then, yeah, I was offered standard everything. I luckily did work experience for a law firm. And I reached out to them and said, look, I'm in a situation. I really don't know how I'm here. Um, what can I do? I only really went to them for advice, and they knew me. They knew this wasn't possible. I mean, we'd done quite a bit of work together beforehand, and which when this was maybe 3-4 years on from when we'd done that. So even then, they were just like, no, we definitely know, because then they knew me at the time. So yeah, they took on my case, which is extremely lucky. Got to trial, did the guilty plea trial and so on and so forth, and did all the standard things that go on before a trial. And I had the trial about 3 weeks after my birthday. And yeah, the first day, this evidence that we kept asking for 6 months before the trial started suddenly was disclosed that didn't exist. And we were told pretty much every day up until the trial date that there was no multimedia messaging. There was nothing there. That evidence, nobody could get any evidence from that, or nothing was relevant. And then it came out that there was a disk download from her phone, which was done 5 days before I was even arrested. And yeah, once we found that out, we requested it. The judge and the prosecution counsel sort of battered down the police officer in charge a little bit, because he was still trying to put up a bit of a fight in us getting it. And then once we got it, I mean, that was it. We were given less than 24 hours to put something together. And when we came back to court the next day, we read just some of the examples out. And the prosecution counsel, the judge, everybody was just shocked that this was being hidden, basically. And so, yeah, then the prosecution, essentially the whole thing got put down to the trial needed to be redone if there was going to be a trial, because we needed more time to go through the evidence. I mean, there was like 100 conversations, not even text messages, 100 conversations that we managed to pick up out of. It was 2,418 pages of text messages that had 30 messages on each page, so about 60,000 we're talking. And yeah, after 2 weeks, the prosecution, the CPS were deciding whether or not they were going to pursue it in light of what was deemed as new evidence, but obviously it'd been there the whole time. And pretty much instantly just dropped the whole case, and I was exonerated of everything. The judge actively told me that I leave a stain on my character. So it's it's been a wild ride. And since then, I spoke to a Times reporter on the day that I came out of the court once it had been dropped, and they said, "Oh, we can't believe this has happened. This is really common." And they said, "Will I speak to them for a little while?" And I spoke to them afterwards, and I was in the hotel that was opposite my courtroom with them. I wasn't staying there. It was just they had a bar there, and we went for a celebratory drink.
That was a good drink.
Oh, honestly, nothing's ever tasted any better. And yeah, that was it. It was, woke up the next day and the BBC News, Sky News, the works, and it was just it's been a weird few years.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like it's been, we're talking 3 years, nearly 3 years now since that trial. It'll actually be in 10 days, it'll be 3 years exactly. So, yeah, and nearly 4 since I was arrested. But, everything's as if it was yesterday.
Yes, yeah. If I could just take you back to the holding cell. So you're arrested from your home. You're in your dressing gown. Your mum doesn't want to let people into the house to arrest you. You get taken to the police station. You say you spent sort of 6.5 hours in a holding cell. How much did you know of why you were there?
I was so in the drive up, I was told what the accusation was about, who it was by. And that was it. I didn't know anything else. I was just told that an accusation had been made, and I was under arrest. And that was what I was told in the car.
Did you know it was of a sexual nature?
Yeah. So I was told it was for rape and sexual offence, for an accusation of rape and sexual offence, and yeah, I just sort of sat and waited to just kind of find out what the hell was going on. Nobody would really talk to me. I mean, the people that arrest you aren't the same people that interview you, which I think isn't as common knowledge as most people think. But yeah, just an odd. Yeah.
So you then leave the police station after being interviewed, and it's 13 months before you're charged. And you're told all along the way that the officer doesn't believe it's going to get taken any further, and then your world is shattered when you are charged. But how did you live in that 13 months kind of limbo? I mean, that is a long time.
Yeah, I think I'm calm. I'm calm when I talk about it, and there are obviously things that go on behind the scenes, mentally and everything like that. But at the time, I was I was a complete mess. I mean, I really nearly just derailed everything, because I just didn't understand. It's so difficult to comprehend that how you get there when you haven't done anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just the longer it went on and the less I knew, and the more I was learning about the things that can go wrong, from my degree, the whole thing, it just felt never ending. So at one point I was really quite severely suicidal. I think after about 6 months, maybe 5 6 months, I think it really did just start to, I don't know, just bury me. And I think it was quite difficult because you're trying to balance out, you want to commit suicide because that's the way out. I would never plead guilty to something or confess something that I haven't done. But those are your kind of options to end it that you're in control of, rather than, because there's nothing you can really do at this stage. For me, I had a new phone, like I knew that nothing was going to come from my phone really, because it was brand new, and I just thought that whole thing, I deleted everything, and it wasn't anything other than I just didn't want it on my phone. That was it. I just wanted to move on with life. And I think it was probably the biggest regret, obviously, I made, because if I had it, maybe it would have been quicker. I mean, probably not, knowing that it was hidden anyway. But so I think it was just tough. You don't plan for a future. I think that was one of the most difficult things when everything ended, and all the charges removed and so on and so forth. It was very difficult to be in normal life. I mean, I had a seizure 2 weeks after my case was dropped. I had a very severe seizure in the bath on Boxing Day, actually. And it was one of my worst memories, I think, ever, because I just remember, I felt so silly because everything was supposed to be over, but there was this build up, and it was an anticlimax in terms of, she gave part of her evidence and I didn't get to do anything. And I think sometimes you kind of want to be able to, before it ended, just to really be like, rather than to your solicitors and the people that obviously believe you, to people that don't know you, like the judge and the jury and everything. I really wanted to get up there and just be like, look, this is exactly how it went down. And then I wanted those messages to kind of come out to be like, this is so there was no doubt whatsoever. And I think that was, I'm very grateful, and I'm admittedly very lucky, but it was also very tough to take. And then, what is life without the accusation? You just don't remember.
Yeah. So we go from this kind of, if we just sort of follow the journey a little bit, you're feeling suicidal. How did it feel then? So you're feeling dreadful, worse than dreadful. Then you find these text messages in the sort of 60,000 text messages. How did that feel? Like reading? Did you read them with your lawyer, or did your lawyer read them and then told you, or what happened there?
So the initial set, I think it was like 100 messages, were submitted as evidence by the prosecution, and they were added to the disclosure pack like a week or something before the trial. So it was obviously with the intent of not being particularly helpful.
Yeah.
And in those messages that they were relying on, it said it wasn't against my will or anything. And I thought, to me, in my head, I thought, if that message alone, whoever's reading that message alone, in the conversation, in the context that it was in, it was talking about the first time, which was then became an accusation of rape in this multitude of her story. And that there was a conversation before the accusation was made, but that was said even after we'd broken up. So for me at that point, it was like that raised red flags. That would have raised red flags anywhere. So why did that not raise red flags before, like in this investigation? And I was furious, I think, at this point. And then when we got this, I went through every message with just, probably not every single message, because I think it's just impossible to go through. But
yes, yeah.
I read as many as I could, because it's not just the fact that your life is on the line. It was just this, it's like a book that you can't put down. And you kind of want to find out what happens next, because there's things obviously that behind the scenes that I didn't know, the conversations that were going on with my friends, and me having access to all of that. If you're talking in the big grand debate, a lot of people say I should never have had access to that, and I do completely understand that. But that was actually, a lot of that was the evidence that proved what I was saying was correct. And so, if I shouldn't have access to that, but the police officer should be the one that's going through that properly, and because they weren't, that was why I should have had access to it, because they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing, or they did and they hid it. It's one or the other. Either way, it's rubbish.
Absolutely, yeah. So
yeah, I was elated. I was, every emotion went through me at that point. I was gutted. I was ecstatic at the fact that we had something physical, some tangible evidence
Mm-hmm.
that's so rare in these cases. But I was so just furious and just depressed that we've gone through this 2 years and this had been sitting there before I was even arrested.
Yeah,
Um,
you used the word lucky earlier, and I mean, I think that's a perfect description. Lucky to have this found at that particular time and not remained hidden. Yeah,
Yeah, this had to be signed off by line managers, and this had to go through so many people before we'd even got there. So there were people that were signing off saying that there was nothing relevant in there, that had either just not read it and hadn't focused on it and blah blah blah. Nobody was double checking it, which just makes the whole thing worse because how easy it was for them to hide it.
yeah,
And it was only because we had a new prosecution counsel, who basically said, well, I don't know anything about this. The previous one, the one that was on the case before Jerry, as far as we know, knew, signed off on it as well and said there was nothing relevant. So it wasn't just one person acting in that way. So I think it was very lucky that we had the change of counsel. I'm very lucky to have the judge that we did, because the judge
yeah,
could have said, no, the whole thing was just any one of those triangle of things. If I didn't have a defense barrister that was willing to kind of look at that a little bit further and find out what was going on,
yeah.
or solicitors that were willing to do the same thing, So yeah, lots of factors that make me lucky.
One sort of final question on this, and then we'll move on to sort of what you're doing now. But when you were reading those messages and you discovered them, did you know there and then the allegations would now be dropped, or was there some sort of creeping doubt at the back of your mind that this is just going to remain going on?
I really thought we were going to go to another trial. I really did, and it was just because everybody had said to me, and I kind of just stopped believing what people were telling me. But everybody was saying to me, you're not going to be charged, or this is going to be dropped in 3 months, and then it wasn't. Oh, this is going to be dropped in 6, and then it wasn't. It's going to be dropped over in a year, and then it wasn't. Oh, you're not going to be charged, and then I was.
Hmm.
And there's going to be some kind of text messages, and then there wasn't until right at the very end. And all these things that people tell you to get you through it, and so on and so forth. And I understand why people said that you can't say the opposite. That's just significantly worse. But I think at that point I was so hopeless, that I just sort of given up and just thought, right, we're going to go to another trial. Somehow this disc is going to get wiped before it gets to us again, and we're going to be back at square one. And I just thought, the whole thing was just a bit. It was gonna take another turn. There was still another twist in the story, and I think probably there was, but not in the way that I expected.
No, and obviously the right results at the end of the day. So that was 3 years ago, almost now. How have you felt the last sort of 3 years, and what have you been up to?
I finished my master's degree. I initially started campaigning on a project called Innovation of Justice. That was a little while ago, and we held conferences to raise awareness around miscarriages of justice. And I've done various talks, and I've done as much as I possibly can whilst trying to sort of, I guess, rebuild. My career path is in ruins. In terms of following criminology, because I can't campaign or I can't be involved or politically affiliated with false accusations if I want to join things like the Ministry of Justice. So, which was always the plan. And so that was quite difficult. So my master's degree ended up being in psychology. I'm not going to become a psychologist. I'd be very shocked if I suddenly had a change in decision there. But I loved psychology, but I think it was always in the criminology field that my heart lied. At the moment, I work in publishing for a scientific research publisher, I enjoy my job there. But I think my heart and soul was in campaigning, and that's eventually what I've gone back to. So I am now a father. My partner Hannah and I have a wonderful daughter.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And in the last few months, we've been just sort of spitballing an idea that has now grown into something that's actually getting closer and closer to actually happening. So we now have a project called the Defendant, which I think we've had so much more support for it than even we realised. But we've both been through the system the same way. And both kind of. I think it's the not knowing part, the whole ambiguity of the system as to what you're doing, and especially when you're quite young, you're really. I guess you're impressionable, and you have this naive belief of, put your full faith into the system and so on and so forth. And that's not how the law works at the moment. It isn't that you can say 100%, yeah, police can do X, Y, and Z, and they're going to do it. There's more to it than that. And so what we wanted to do was, I think a lot of it relates to so many issues. So the Black Lives Matter things and things like that. In my case as well, where you can't recognise abuses of power if you don't know how the process is supposed to go, and so you can't tell when those rules are being broken because you don't know what the rules are. For us, there's things that have become part of the status quo of the system that aren't against the law and aren't abuses of power. It's just because of how badly the system is funded, like how long it takes to get a decision, how it took a year and a month for a charging decision to find that out, and why that took so long. But there are other things like withholding evidence or not disclosing something, and it's all fancy wrapped in and gift wrapped in legal terminology. And so what we're going to do is we've got a website being built now. We're having some people do some content writing for us and things like that. So that's on its way. And what it's going to do is do everything anything before a conviction or a not guilty verdict. So it's broken initially into 3 stages, which is investigation. Then you have if you've been charged, and then you have if you're going to trial, and the actual trial itself. And essentially, we wanted to kind of separate them that way, so it's in a chronological order, because a lot of the information that you stumble upon isn't relevant. When you're talking about being charged, your rights and things can differ to when it's in the investigation stage or if we're just doing a voluntary interview. So rather than creating some kind of panic, we wanted people to have the information that they needed. That will it'll be a bit more interactive. So they're going to click on these things as like buttons, and then underneath that there'll be sections. Once they click on those sections, they'll have small blocks of information. So the idea is to not overwhelm the user with information that's not relevant, that they're not looking for. And I think that on its own will cause a lot of panic if you're met with this huge chunk of information. You're already feeling quite overwhelmed. So if you've got too much going in, you're going to feel quite buried in it. So they have the opportunity to basically minimize some of the information and click on the things that they are interested in learning or reading about, but also the things that are relevant to them for the stages that they're at. And that's done also as chronologically as it can be. Some things can't be done in a full chronological order. It's not as simple as that. And then the longer term goal that we're going to begin is a national helpline. So essentially the idea is similar to victim support, but for defendants, because there isn't anything out there. I think there was a statistic that since 2016, we did a documentary for the BBC recently, and they came out with it. I think it was called "I Am Not a Rapist," and in that they said since 2016 there's been over 1,000 cases that have stopped due to essentially suicide. And I just thought the whole thing baffles me, because nobody is able. You particularly when you're innocent, we're not determining whether or not people are guilty or not guilty. We're not given legal advice in terms of practicality of this is how you win your case. Basically, that's not what it is. This is just basic information of what to expect and how the process is supposed to go. So when things aren't doing that, you can recognize it. But there's also that just emotional support. When you're innocent, you don't know where to go, who to speak to. You just 9 times out of 10, people just want to tell you about their case. They don't actually want to do anything about it, particularly when you're innocent, because you're kind of just wrapped up in how do I deal with this? You'll still always have that belief that the truth is going to come out, and then it's how do I deal with this? So that's where our focus lies. It's just helping people cope, especially with coronavirus. I think backlogging cases now, it can take up to 5 years. And the thought of that just wild. 2 years was an eternity for me.
Yeah.
I would have. I'll be honest. I would have committed suicide if it was 5. It's this the harsh truth of it, and it's quite blunt, but that's it. I
Yeah.
just you can't live in a limbo without a deadline, without knowing. You can't build a life because it will show up on. How many times is it going to show up in a DBS check if you're charged by the time you've got to trial and then you found not guilty? How many jobs have you lost in that
Yeah.
process? And the whole thing for me just. I think there's much bigger need for it now. There was always a need for it, but there's a much bigger need for it now than there ever was. I mean, victims have the victim commissioner and they have victim support, and there's specifically designated charities for that, and a lot of charities for miscarriages of justice are focusing on appealing a conviction, whereas nobody's sort of really, other than sometimes in the context of sexual offences, but we're broadening past that because this isn't just about this isn't just rape or sexual assault. This is, you could be accused of any crime. Anyone could be accused of any crime by the state, by a person, by whatever. You could be seen on CCTV in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I don't think that's really settled with people just yet, because everybody thinks if you're a law-abiding citizen, nothing will ever happen to you in terms of the law. When actually, as you get older, you learn you will come into contact with law at some point. It's very likely. It could be for questioning, it could be as a witness, it could be as a victim, but at some stage you will come into contact with the criminal justice system. And not knowing what that means is very, very daunting, and you will be taken advantage of. You will be swept through right until the end, and you won't know what's hit you if you don't know what's going to happen or what's supposed to be happening. That's pretty much.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. How long do you think, like in an ideal world, if if you reach your funding goals or get funding for this, how long do you think before the sort of national helpline idea would be rolled out?
It's very difficult because I think the website itself. I think for us, the website has to come first, because otherwise we'll get a lot of calls to the helpline asking the questions that could have been answered on there, and so on and so forth. I think a year, till it could be, I guess, organised enough to be national. In terms of it actually coming out, hopefully 4 to 6 months. The thing is that it's very difficult because you don't know what the demand's going to be like. If you get no calls, then it's never going to be national. But the counter side of it is that I think probably you will, and I think a main point of success for us would be that when you're arrested and you're released after your interview, they give you the sheet of paper that has all these numbers. And I think for people that leave that have been accused of any crime should have that a helpline number. If it's too much, this is a specific place that deals with this type of stuff and we'll do the training and so on and so forth. There's a lot of training that you have to do to make sure things are okay. And ideally we want people that have kind of gone through the system and have that experience to be part of this, volunteers for it. So it's a case of, we don't know what access to resources we're going to have. We have our target for funding at the moment, but with funding, I think things can be quite a quick turnaround. And then training obviously will have to happen at certain times, but who knows what impact coronavirus has on training and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of factors to it. But ideally, I couldn't imagine longer than I don't even think a year. I don't think it would be that long, but I think maximum would be a year. But I don't want to overpromise. That's my bigger thing.
No, don't know that, and that all sounds great. So, just tell our viewers how can they get involved if they wanted to donate money? Is there a donation pledge scheme up and running?
Yeah, we have a crowdfunder page. If people type in the defendant on Twitter, it should come up. But if not, if you give me a search, I believe my Twitter handle is, sorry, bear with me 2 seconds, I have it here. Is at Liam _Allan, ALLAN 95. And on there, it has the links to the crowdfunder. And you should, to be honest, I retweet from our social media account. We're on Instagram and Facebook as well. So, for us, I think the big thing really is a lot of people think that they need to donate 20, 50, 100 pounds, those types of figures. But what's quite key is, a follow, a share, a like, all of it shows how much support there is for the project, but actually how needed it is.
Yeah.
So when doing the crowdfunder, I've said to plenty of people, if you can only afford £1, if you can only afford like whatever the minimum is, I think maybe the minimum is £1, it counts you as a supporter rather than a donator. So it actually labels you as a supporter. So if we had, thousands of people that are just giving £1 just to show support, then actually what we're seeing is that this project is backed by 1,000 people. Because it's very difficult to quantify these things.
Absolutely.
So yeah, following us on Twitter, everything like that, any updates. We do have some exciting things coming out in terms of potentially some giveaways, to people that have donated and things like that. So we're gonna, I can't announce anything just yet, but it's 100% something to keep an eye out for.
Absolutely.
In the coming weeks.
So get involved, people. Search the defendant on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or find Liam's Twitter account as well. And like Liam said, if you can just give £1, that would be absolutely that would be absolutely fantastic. If not, just retweet, share, like, and get behind the program. That sounds fantastic. Are you okay if we take a couple of questions that I've had emailed in?
Yeah, by all means.
Wonderful. Right. So our first question is from a good friend of mine, Dr. Tom Smith. He asks, do you think any progress has been made by the police regarding the issues that sort of you faced 3 years ago? Do you think there's been any progress?
Yeah, it's really funny. I was looking at, so they'd created these disclosure officers, and I think that was one of the biggest changes. And I haven't heard a single thing. I don't know who a disclosure officer is. I don't know what they do. I haven't heard a single thing. I think there were so many things that were done for show. I think so many things were done wrong. Just in terms of they were approached wrong. I think some things that they did, the consent forms, I think this is the best example. The consent forms were one of the most controversial things that came out probably from my case and from all the cases that kind of followed on from that.
Is this the searching of the mobile phone consent form?
For the complainants, yeah. And I understood the part behind it, but the problem was always going to be a lot of the things that are going wrong aren't because the system doesn't have things in place. It's because the things that are in place aren't being followed. And the consent forms were going to be the exact same issue. What would happen is somebody would take it too literally, or they download things that weren't relevant and they'd force somebody and so on and so forth, and it wouldn't be a comfortable process for the complainant, which isn't the right move, because all it did was fuel the fire that if the people that are falsely accused need kind of help in the system and things need to change to help them, then it's going to disadvantage the real victims. And if real victims need something, which is now the removal of the consent form for a complainant's phone, then it's going to disadvantage those that are falsely accused. And I've said this from day one, I don't think anything will ever change until people that are falsely accused come together with real victims of rape. Nobody's going to win. Because I said this actually in a talk, that the biggest problem, and this is why rape prosecutions are really low and why people that are falsely accused probably go further in the system, because people that are lying, or people that want to get away with something, or people who are basically in the wrong and are guilty, whether it's for a false accusation or real rape, are willing to do whatever it takes. And one of those big things, because it's word against word, are to fluff your story up with details. When you're telling the truth, it's not possible, or you don't contemplate doing that, because the truth is the truth. That's it. You were there. This is what the experience was, and so on and so forth. But when you look at a lot of false accusations, what tends to happen is a new accusation gets added on, or something else gets added on, and something new comes up. And it's really common. And you'll have the exact same thing with, guilty people that have actually rapists, basically. And what they'll do is they'll be willing to lie about what has happened, about the details of such and such, and they'll create a fake alibi or blah blah blah, and the people that are honest kind of get caught in this little grey area, because you tell the truth and there's always that question of, well, why didn't you do this, or why didn't you do that, and why didn't you think about this, or blah 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 blah. And what happens is you just honest, you just say, well, it didn't cross my mind, or I didn't think I needed to worry about that, or I was in this place at this time, and blah blah blah. And all that happens is you become suspicious, because the truth is the truth. You're not willing to add more detail to something because this is what happened. And people seem to be more suspicious of that than somebody that's willing to add extra details at every point that they get. So yeah, I think nothing's changed. I personally think things are about to get worse again. I think there'll be another Liam Allan case, but somebody else. And I think it will just be so much worse. I really do. I don't think that it will be caught in the middle, and I think there'll be big stories coming out about real victims of rape that have really suffered quite strenuous trauma because of the COVID backlogs and the way the process now works, and how strict everything now is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not optimistic, but I can honestly assure you that nothing's changed. Actually, things just reverted back to how they were um, before I was accused, I think.
Thank you. That answers Andrew Pavlov's question as well, which was concerning whether or not things are improving, which clearly you don't think they are. We've got a question from Amelia Siemens. She's a student of mine at UE. She's got a couple of questions. Can you describe the impact that these allegations had in this journey through the process had on your sort of family and friends? So not just you, but your sort of wider family and friends as well.
Yeah, I was really lucky because I was from a very not small group of friends. I had quite a large group of friends, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. But we were all very close knit. I'm from a very small family. I don't know my dad's side. I don't know my dad. So at the time I was accused, it was just me, my mum, my great aunt, a distant uncle, and you know, like there were sort of many bits of family, but the main basis of it was me, my mum, and my great aunt. And yeah, it was heartbreaking because mum always said that if I had committed suicide or if anything happened to me, then you know she wouldn't be able to carry on. And the thought of that was so terrifying because it wasn't just like this is going to ruin my life. It was this now completely takes my mum's life away. I'm an only child, you know, and it's very difficult when there's really two of you that have been together for your whole lives.
Yeah.
And then that to be ripped away for something that everybody knew didn't happen. It was so much harder to swallow. So yeah, I mean, I know for a fact my mum battled quite harshly with mental health through that, and my friends were the same because I think it was had to be the one to them that was making preparations for me not being around in the build up to the trial, because I said to them, you know, somebody needs to look after my mum, somebody needs to do this, and I was so it's horrible saying this, but I was so focused on building and making sure that life was going to be okay if the worst did happen, that they were struggling to kind of understand what, you know, how I was kind of moving. You know, it seemed as if I was accepting it and laying down and kind of already defeated before the trial had even started, and it wasn't that. It was just, you know, I had felt myself personally how sudden things will change and how easy, you know, how quickly you feel those changes.
Yeah.
And if I ended up behind bars for something that I didn't do, they hadn't thought past that. You know, they were always of the mindset of, you know, you're not going anywhere. This is going to be it. And somebody had to be real with them and say, there's a possibility, given that, you know, I wasn't supposed to be charged. I wasn't supposed to be X, Y, and Z. And we got to the trial day and it was just, I'm not supposed to be here. You know, we all know it, but I am. And that means that I could be there as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so somebody had to take the realistic view and be prepared, and nobody else is going to do that. So yeah, I couldn't put into words how it fractured so many things, so many things. I mean, I isolated myself from my family, and they knew I isolated myself a little bit from my friends. You know, I was very vacant and distant for the closer we got to the trial. At one point, you know, it was just I couldn't speak, and so yeah, you know. It tore them apart, but I think it tore them apart because it's harder watching somebody going through it and not being able to do anything than kind of being involved, I guess. Because at least you're able to do something or say something and you know, do something meaningful.
Yeah.
Well, I say that. I mean, I wasn't, but you know, generally that's how it is. So, yeah.
Thank you. I've got another question from Amelia, and it's quite a tough question, but I'll ask it anyway. If you don't want to answer it, we can skip over it. But
Yeah, no, okay.
Amelia asks, do you feel your reputation has been tarnished by everything that you've gone through? Because
To
the
people
judge
that,
gave you an unequivocal exoneration, didn't he, on that
yes.
collapse? Was that enough vindication for you?
See, no, because do you know what? My reputation is to some people, my reputation is somebody that got away with it,
Yeah.
because you can't, because of the way the law works, and probably with good reason. It doesn't feel like it in cases like mine, but generally, a law applied to them all does make sense. That the evidence, I can't reveal the evidence that wasn't read out in court. So all the things that showed that this didn't happen are essentially buried, deep and can't be shown. That's just it. That's just life. So that's quite tough, because when the comments come up of how do we know he didn't do it, and well, that's not proof, and sometimes for some people, no matter how much people, no matter how much the world is saying it didn't happen, some people are just adamant that it did. That's just it. There is that belief of no smoke without fire. Or I said this, I think people will assume that I was a bad person. I did something horrible, and I deserved this, even if I didn't do this. I must have done something horrible for somebody to be willing to do that. And the heartbreaking part of it is that I'd never done anything wrong to her, so for somebody to hate you, I guess, that much.
Yeah.
But maybe not, maybe it's not in terms of hatred towards me. Maybe it was for outside factors like attention seeking and so on and so forth. It may have just been a severe cry for help, potentially, that was unrelated to this, that they were suffering mentally, any number of things. It could have been a mental health disorder. I'm of the belief that it probably is. There's still that people believe that I must have done something to get myself in that.
On that note, on sort of the sexual offences course, module I lecture at UWE, we've just finished sort of rape suspect / defendant anonymity. So I have a question. Do you think suspects accused of sexual offence crimes should be given anonymity? And if so, until what stage?
A lot, this question comes up so much.
I bet it does.
It's a very tough question, because there's going to be circumstances to it. I think that there are severe wrong ways of doing it. I've seen people's names and addresses posted in newspapers claiming that they've done it when the accusations first been made. We saw it with some of I think the Madeleine McCann documentary on Netflix showed that even what was the most recent one with the drones in Gatwick, or where was it? Heathrow, and then there was that couple that was posted all over the newspapers.
You're right. Yeah.
Picture. And it turned out, this is what I mean, removing it from the context of sexual offences, and everybody will say, actually, do you know what? Yeah. And it's because it's in the context of sexual offences that everybody goes, it's tougher on it, because it's one of the worst crimes. So I think there should be anonymity. I think at least in the media, but I think social media is now very powerful.
Yeah.
I think the media, as much as we don't like to believe it influences us, if we read a story, they'll imply that it's happened when it, there's no confidence that it has, and there's loopholes to it as to the language you can use. And I just think that once you're there, I've seen somebody who unfortunately the person that accused him committed suicide, and it actually was, I think, proven as a false accusation after they'd committed suicide. But because it was after they'd committed suicide and they'd already done no further action, then it wasn't possible to pursue proving it, because there wasn't another side technically. And then they had, their evidence and everything like that. But the article stayed on Google, and although that they go to Google and say X, Y, and Z, this is the proof, and they had their legal battle, Google essentially said that was what was done at the time, and so on and so forth. So, once they're in the media, or once you're made public, and so on and so forth, and once your identity is out there, it doesn't go back. And there's a common misconception that articles are then written afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
The person that was falsely accused, and essentially what happened with my story, but people seem to think that that's what happened with everyone's. And there is a reason why, when most of these conversations come up, I'm the person that gets spoken to, because one, there's not a lot of people that want to speak out about this. It's very, very difficult. It's very, very mentally, it's one of the hardest things I think you could be asked to do, because you relive it every day. But also, if you say one wrong thing, you are slaughtered. And people don't have the luxury that I do, where it's publicly announced that I was exonerated and I had the evidence specifically proving it, that barristers have come out and commented on, and so on and so forth. And that case has been so widely reported that it's not really in contention anymore. Whereas somebody that's just got a not guilty verdict or something like that, things are, you can contest that, and because of the way the law works, they can't reveal the evidence to prove they're innocent, or so on and so forth. So then it becomes a bit more of a blurred grey area.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. No, that's great. That makes sense. It's a difficult question to answer.
I'm used to them. They're all difficult.
Thank you. So, Mark Heffer asked, and I think we sort of covered this earlier, but if you could whip it up in a sort of snapshot. Mark Heffer asks, would you agree with the idea that when it comes to the CPIA, there are only two reasons that disclosure fails, namely incompetence or corruption? If not, what causes non-compliance with the disclosure regime?
What is CPIA?
It's the Criminal Procedure Investigations Act 1996, and that houses all of the disclosure sort of requirements. So basically, the law that compels or suggests that the police prosecution have to disclose evidence that undermines the prosecution's case or would assist your case, the defendant's case.
Yeah, I didn't know that would just be abbreviated to CPIA. I can see why it's abbreviated.
Yeah, there's lots of abbreviations.
It's very difficult. I think because there's sometimes I don't think you can put it down as incompetency. As tough as this is for me to swallow, in my case, evidence was cherry picked. It was quite obvious that evidence was being cherry picked, and it wasn't like wasn't sure whether or not to disclose. What was it? There was the phrase, if in doubt, leave it out. And it was a really common phrase that I was being told the police officers, that was words to live by when it came to disclosure. Because if you reveal something that's too personal, then you're ridiculed in that sense. So it's better to leave it out. And the police force as a whole is ridiculed. So I think sometimes there's so much pressure and tension around what can and can't be disclosed that realistically there needs to be an independent disclosure agency. Because you're asking, it baffles me even to this day, because if you ask police what their job is, it's to catch criminals. That's what they'll all say. They'll never, ever, ever say, or one in about 3 million will say to impartially investigate crime. It's always, or potentially not crime. It's always to catch criminals or to do some good in the world, or it's something based on the foundation of catching bad guys. And it's the stereotypical, that's all anybody thinks the police force are for. And actually, sometimes it's to investigate innocence, when and that should count as a crime solved. And I think obviously I've said this before, but when you look at how the police are potentially viewed in terms of success, it's conviction rates and charging rates and so on and so forth, and that's how the measurements are done. So for me personally, I think sometimes it is just the fear of getting it wrong, and that seems like a middle ground, is not putting it in at all and then saying you didn't see it.
So you think there should be an independent body that would be responsible for making disclosure to the defence?
For deciding what's relevant and what's not.
Yeah.
I think that's or what's too personal and so on, and those types of factors, because I think if you give the police and the CPS that kind of power before it can go to a defence, then how do you know any of the evidence that you've received is the right evidence that hasn't been tampered with, or things removed and so on and so forth? It's very difficult to think of that, because the way that I see it is now that my view of the way the system works. So the police and the CPS are there to help prosecute you, and then you have your defence team that works independent against what they're bringing to the table. So realistically, in my mind, everyone should then see what evidence has been collected, but that's not what happens. You get shown what you're given. And sometimes that can be buried for years. I mean, there's cases that have come out like Eddie Guilfoyle's.
Yeah.
There's evidence that was buried, in stacks of papers, and then was finally disclosed. And now it's not that it's too late. It's just that the system isn't willing to listen to it because it's been so long.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think part of it is incompetence. I think part of it is just the way the system is designed, is that you will be prosecuted and presumed guilty until your trial, which is when your legal team really is, when it kicks in, when it can actively do more things and refute, and you get the chance to basically, tell your side of the story, I suppose.
Okay, thank you very much. A couple more questions. One from Rika Ryan, which asks, other than the disclosure of the text messages in your case, was there anything that should or could have been done differently? So it didn't, obviously, aside from not not taking you to trial, I suppose, but was there any other issues in the case?
Yeah, my initial solicitor, before I was charged, the duty solicitor, the firm that I was given, went bust for dishonesty in court, and nobody told me. The police officer in charge, on the day in July, I was given a date. Once you're bailed, the first time they give you a date of when you're supposed to come back to the police station to either be re-bailed or charged or no further action. Those would be the decision. What actually happened was the police officer in charge didn't turn up, wasn't interested. I was then re-bailed with no date, no deadline, no nothing, and that was it. I was just left in the system, and I was just kind of floating. The case, I know the case went back and forth a lot, to the point where, because of that, it went from 3 accusations to 13 by the time I was in court, and nobody had told me, nobody had asked me more questions. No friends or family were interviewed and asked questions. They didn't go to any of them, which a lot of them would have backed up a lot of the stories, that when we're talking about what happened and when things happened, they would have been able to corroborate what was being said. And to be honest, I would have been quite happy sitting in a cell for 24 hours whilst they went and spoke to them, so that they knew that I couldn't have witness tampered or whatever. That wasn't done. I mean, my phone was gone for a year and 2 months, and they couldn't get any evidence off of it. And I guarantee you, they knew that within a week.
Yeah.
Maximum a month. And essentially, my mum was paying 38 quid for a phone that didn't exist.
Yeah.
So that expense was quite stupid. And yeah, I think one of the biggest ones is just the lack of communication. But that's why the defendant is being set up.
Excellent. And that comes on to another question from Rika. I think we've touched on the answer, but what support was available to you when you were arrested? That's why we're here.
The police officer in charge.
Yeah.
That is odd, because when somebody falsely accuses you, obviously a crime has been committed against you. So naturally you go to the police, but the police are the ones that are trying to prosecute you. So you don't have that luxury. So I was given a form after I was arrested, and it had the Samaritan's number, and you research some things, and I speak to quite a few of the falsely accused groups, and I'm a member on some of them on Facebook, but it's very chaotic, because it's not that nothing's official, but to do things on the scale that need to be done is a huge task, like a really, really big task, a task that will take a lifetime. And a lot of the focus, rightly so, at times is on post-conviction and the evidence coming out then, and so on and so forth. And I think it's been forgotten that those things happen because of the wrong things that are happening before wrongful convictions happen. Um, and so yeah, that's really nothing. There was probably a couple of things, but nobody can do anything or speak to you on the level that you probably needed to be spoken
No.
to. But there are groups out there. But if we're talking for all crimes, there aren't.
No.
Not very
And
many.
that's where the defendant steps in,
That's
hopefully.
where the defendants get it. Yeah, that's why we are setting up what we're setting up. There just needs to be support, removing the conversation about, oh, you're trying to get criminals off and blah blah blah. Those things are nonsense in this case, because we're not deciding who's innocent, we're not deciding who's guilty, and we're not helping anyone's case. In fact, the
No.
only thing we're given is emotional support and the basic practical information that is already online, but just in one place.
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh, it sounds like a great idea, and hopefully it can get up and going. Dean Thompson did ask us, how did you feel when you were acquitted? But we've covered that with the elation. So I'd like to end on one final question that I'd like to ask you. How's fatherhood treating you?
It is honestly kicking me in the butt. Um, we're very lucky because I think we had Cara. Well, I say we had. I mean, Hannah had
Yeah, yeah,
Cara. I mean, I'm not gonna. No credit to me in that at all. I won't take anything for that. Just before we went into lockdown, so we were in hospital
wow,
when everything was.
okay, wow,
Yeah, we were in hospital when everything was changing. So she was born February 29th, leap year baby. Would you believe it? Um, And yeah, literally, we were in hospital for 2 weeks because Cara was a little bit early. And yeah, we just watched all the changes and been very grateful to be working from home because it means I get to spend a lot more time
yes,
with Hannah and Cara. It's time that I'll forever be grateful for. But it's so confusing, the work and home boundaries. I find myself working till silly o'clock, more
yeah,
so now, or just checking my laptop and what I've got to do for the next day and blah blah blah. That I just so unhealthy.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, but it is kicking me in the butt.
yeah.
It is kicking me.
Well, it flies by. Pretty soon they're 7 and not going to bed. So pretty much what I've just had there. So that's superb. But congratulations to you and your little family. I send you all my love. And thank you very much for coming on to talk to us, Liam. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
So that wraps up our first episode with Liam Allan. I hope you found it interesting, stimulating, and something that you can hopefully discuss and talk about with your friends, families, course mates if you're a student. If you have an idea for a topic that you'd like us to cover or you'd like to come on the show, please contact me using the details in the credits that's just following this. But I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next week.